See, this story tells you that God decides for the long run. That God loves for the long run. You see, as the passage ended, you heard Moses mention your ancestors, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. See, God had been with these Israelite folks for centuries. That they thought he had left them behind when they were in slavery, but God came back and returned and delivered them. That God had been with them for 40 years in the desert, where, trust me, these Israelites were no picnic to deal with. But more than that, the very backstory of these words tell you that God loves for the long run. See, because for centuries, these words became lost. They were lost in a storage room in the Israelite temple. They only came to light when a young king named Josiah came to the throne of Israel. And Josiah yearned for his people to return towards God, towards God's directions. For years they hadn't, for centuries even, and it had led to disaster. So he asked that the temple be cleaned up, and when it was, they discovered this book from which we read, and they discovered not only were they far away from God's directions, they had forgotten a lot of them. And so Josiah commanded a great assembly and had all the people listen to this book, all 30 plus chapters of it. So they could return. So they could shift their direction. And that's the book from which we read today. And they discovered that when they did, that God was there for them, that God had always been there, always been loving them. That when they were far from God, God was never far from them. Now, while things did get better, they didn't stay that way, because Israel went back to making short-run decisions. But God never gave up, never let go of that love. God kept loving, God kept reaching out, until in the end, God did something dramatic. God became you, a human being, to reach out with that love. And even when we responded to that dramatic act by making the worst decision in human history, by literally killing God in the most brutal way possible, what did God do? God decided to love for the long run. So even as we killed him, Jesus prayed for us. He prayed, "Father, forgive them. They do not know what they do." And on that day, the cross did not win. Our worst decisions did not win. God's love did. And God showed the world that not only do our worst decisions defeat God's love, not even death defeats it. And the more you know that, the more you know that God's love will never leave you nor forsake you, that God is with you in all the decisions of your life, even on your worst decision days, the more it frees you to trust. To trust in God's long-run love for you, to trust in God's directions for you, even in those moments when you cannot see what the future holds. You can trust that in the long run, God will work in ways more wondrous than you could ever imagine or dream. That God will bring you life, even when in those moments in the short run, all you might see is not much life at all.